Hello, this is Mrs. Duncan, and we're continuing our study of Chapter 13, Greek Theater, because this is the basis of what we understand and enjoy as theater today, and theater as an art. And where we're picking up in Chapter 13 is page 265, Playwrights of the Golden Age. And this was this time period we were talking about where they had contests and the best playwrights were writing plays that we still recognize as being amazing today. And they guessed that dozens of playwrights wrote plays during the 4th and 5th centuries BC, producing over 2,000 plays. But unfortunately, most of those scripts have been lost. So they've been mentioned, but we haven't found them all. Maybe we'll find more. But of the few scripts remaining, there are 3 tragic playwrights. So we have 2 on this slide and 1 on the next: Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. And we have mentioned some of them by name already, and you'll be studying the one of the most famous plays ever by Sophocles, Oedipus the King, Oedipus Rex. And so, we wish we knew more what they wrote. Some of these are combined 300 plays. For some reason we believe that. Only 10% has survived. And so, it's, who knows, but Aeschylus is the first one, 525 to 456 BC. Remember, the smaller the number, the closer it is to that point of the Common Era, or they used to measure it to by the life of Christ. So, and then AD, the numbers go up, right? So right now when I'm recording this, we're in 2021 AD. So Aeschylus was considered several things. The most important is the father of tragedy, the earliest writer of Greek tragedy whose plays still exist. But he was not as artsy as we might think of theater people being. He was a warrior, and he was born into a prominent family near Athens. And so it was kind of expected that young men would become soldiers even in Athens, not just Sparta. And they had to defend their country. So he fought in battles of Marathon and Salamis, which crushed the Persians, which was a high point for Greek culture. He wrote all these plays, and he really wrote them about profound spiritual and moral issues. And the Oresteia, we mentioned that one with the whole, Agamemnon being killed by his unfaithful wife and her lover after he returned from the Trojan War, and the son having that dilemma of, it's my job to avenge his death, and even the god Apollo tells him this is what you're supposed to do, but then other goddesses, these Furies, are like, that's wrong. And so it's this dilemma, and so it's really exploring, well, what's the right thing to do? What is revenge that's not okay versus what's justice? And so these are still very deep and complex issues, and so the plays still give us a lot to think about. They're not just situated in the time and within the belief of mythology. And so he's also had very much a theatrical flair. His plays had big, huge casts, beautiful costumes, lots of special effects. So they were very dramatic and very, very entertaining, but they were tragedies, so they had great effect. Well, following up and overlapping by some years there, or just a few years later rather, Sophocles, and we've mentioned him before. So he takes it up a notch. He's just very esteemed. His name means the wise and honored one. Known for being handsome and leading a victory choir, so maybe more what we think of as the traditional artsy person, but he was also the city's treasurer and served in the government. And it just speaks to that connection between what was going on in the theater was very critical and key to what was going on in their society, in their community, and in their politics. It wasn't entertainment over here and then politics, serious stuff over there. They took all of this very, very seriously. His plays are characterized by concentrating on a few critical moments within that character's life, and the issues of fate. Okay, so fate is a big one there, and that's why Oedipus is so famous. He's trapped by fate. He tries to escape his fate, the prediction about his life. I don't want to give away everything about the play just yet. and he tries to because his fate is terrible. He's also known for writing very complex characters. His lyrics, like he was a great musician, and his dialogue was effective. Now, to us, we may not feel like it is. It may seem too long, these long speeches, as we looked at in the last one, the breakdown, but they carried the play and they're easier to understand than many of the others. They estimate that he won the festival of Dionysius 24 times, always top ranked. If he didn't win, he was always second, and he was just awesome. He was just awesome, and he's still considered awesome today, and people still enjoy his plays. Then we get to Euripides, and this man took it to, like, he just wasn't subtle. He was blunt. He was known as the man never afraid to speak his mind, and if he saw a problem in society, he used his plays to speak out against it, whether they were tragedies or whether they were, in most cases, they were tragedies. Even though we mentioned some Aeschylus doing a funny comedy on some of the problems, well, Euripides is famous, for just getting to the point. He's also famous for writing some of the most powerful female characters of Greek tragedy: Electra, Medea, Hecuba, and so having those female protagonists. And you see the picture here. It's also in our book from the Trojan women, this one's Hecuba, which is right after the Trojan women. She is one of the Trojan women, but focusing on the women and their perspective and the impact of war on the family and society and on women and the savagery. In the one that I wanted to mention, Trojan Women, he questions the use of the army and what they are allowed to do, because recently during the Peloponnesian War, which was between Sparta, which is Greek still, but they were not a united nation here except when they had to fight against the Persians. That was some tension there, and they thought they would win and they didn't, and there were some that were neutral, and they demanded them to surrender, and when they didn't, the Athenian army murdered all the men of military age and sold the women and children into slavery. Well, by law, the plays could not be about specific historical incidents. So Euripides wasn't allowed by law for the festival to do a play about that. But he picked a similar event in history, not history, in the mythology of the Trojan War, and used that to kind of make the commentary on it. And he wanted to point out that these events were not caused by the gods, but by human cruelty, which is very different from Sophocles, because he put Oedipus in a position where, what he tried to do, and Orestes in Aeschylus in his play, the gods put him in the pickle. Well, not here. He says, no, this has nothing to do with the gods. This has to do with human choice. And so even though we don't believe in myths like that, we still struggle with, our own destiny and our own free will, and what's choice and what's karma and what's the work of a divine providence or sovereign or a universal force or whatever guiding things. And so they tackle those. So that's the main thing I wanted you to get. Those are important people, and how theater is an art. They establish that, and how it has a message, and that it delivers, and how they set the bar really high way back then. They did have comedies. We all enjoy to be entertained, and they divided into the era before and after the Peloponnesian War, which was a really difficult thing when Athens lost, that it changed their views about a lot of things, and Aristophanes was the key comic playwright here. I mentioned his play before, Lysistrata, with the women, saying, no, we're not going to have any sex until the men stop fighting. And so it was funny then, but after the war, it was kind of harder to find things that were funny. But he would poke fun at Greek society, and it would be humorous. Euripides, not too funny at all. Tragedies. But he took a lighter approach, and that could be effective as well. And there was a lot more freedom of speech in Athens at that time. They estimate that he wrote about 40 comedies, but we only have 11. He would be like the Saturday Night Live writer for some of the late show comedians today. He would satirize and make fun of the Greek leaders and make people laugh about it, and he could get away with it, right? After the war, though, people got really kind of touchy, and you had to kind of back off. So Menander is not mentioned too much, but he's the only kind of main one. They backed off of trying to not insult those in power. So their subjects were more kind of like modern sitcoms, actually. They dealt with the family and marriage and mother-in-laws and finding love and domestic life. They just stayed away from the politics. He's famous for this line: in marriage, there are no known survivors. So he did have something there. And they mentioned the play titled Curmudgeon. All right, so that's that overview of those. What we want to come back to is we have to come back to Aristotle and the Poetics. So we mentioned him. He came up in the chapter on experiencing and analyzing plays, and this was his time period. And so he kind of observed all this, and he was kind of the intellectual. He didn't write the plays, but he analyzed and kind of said, oh, this is what makes up a really good play. And we still look at that and go, yeah, he's right. So just a reminder there, he's a little further down the road. He's not in the 400s, he's in the 300s. But he refers back, and he picks on Sophocles and Oedipus as being kind of the ideal tragedy. And he recognized comedy, but not really. He said, no, that's just for fun. Tragedy, that's the real deal on plays. And they were poetic, so they didn't really separate it. It was poetry that was said by characters, and sung. So the lines were very blurred as far as that goes. Playwrights were known as poets. It was not really a play if it wasn't poetic. And it wasn't until much later, modern drama, the late 1800s, one of my favorite time periods in playwrights, Henry Ibsen, who started writing plays that matched how people actually talked. And no one took him seriously at first. It was supposed to be poetry. So there's these 6 elements: plot, character, thought, diction, song, and spectacle, which we talked more about in that, I think it's chapter 4. We also have a famous student, and the book says that had it not been for his most famous student, Greek theater might have been lost to us. It might have been barely mentioned. We don't have that many to begin with, pieces of the plays, but because of Aristotle, Alexander the Great, who became king of Macedonia and defeated the Persians, right? Built the big Greek empire, reunited them and became the king over them. He was very interested in Greek culture. He would take his books by the playwrights that we mentioned, Euripides, Sophocles, and Aeschylus, with him on battle and have him on his stand. I mean, he like his nightstand, whatever that was. This has been documented, and so we know he had a library, the Library of Alexandria, one of the first universities. Incredible. And because of the fire, they lost a lot of the stuff there, but like the basis of geometry and algebra, pi, all these things about the earth, there was just so much that he gathered, and we have remnants of that, thankfully, but it was kind of lost. But that was one of the first universities, and it's connected to Aristotle and his emphasis on the plays of Greek culture. All right, real quick here, we'll wrap this up. Romans borrowed from the Greeks for many things, as they were the next big empire, and conquered Greece in its decline, became wealthy, and was the empire during the time of Christ and so forth. But by comparison, it's the Las Vegas of ancient times. Whereas Greek culture was serious and philosophical and foundational to learning, Rome was woohoo, let's be on the opposite end of that, and let's just entertain to the max. Whatever is entertaining, that's what we'll do. So the bread and circus is a little device there. It's the idea of you give people enough food, bread, and entertainment, circus, they won't question the government. So it was really a ploy by the politicians to say, let's not have people think too much about politics. Let's just keep them busy with entertainment. We'll give them whatever they want to keep them distracted. And that was really a documented ploy. The main Roman playwright, Seneca, which I think his slide's on the next page, he just says, I come home after watching the gladiators in the Colosseum more greedy, more cruel, and inhuman because I have been among human beings like that. He says, I attended a midday exhibition, this is on page 273, expecting some fun, some wit, some relaxation, but it was quite the contrary. In the morning they throw men to the lions, at noon they throw them to the spectators. The crowd demands that the victor who has slain his opponent shall face the man who will slay him in turn, and the last conqueror is reserved for another butchering. Man, a sacred thing, is killed for sport and merriment. So the circus isn't what we think of as circus. It's just entertainment, but it was violent, it was base, it was obscene in many times. It was whatever people wanted. There was no holds barred. So they did whatever entertained people without any kind of restriction. Might be jugglers, acrobats, comedy, but it was also vulgar, indecent, pornography, live sex acts on stage. It was just, pretty base, pretty low, without any thought to, integrity or ethics or anything like that. One popular form was Roman mimes, and but they would act out all kinds of things. Women were allowed on stage, but usually only as sex objects, and they weren't necessarily silent like the pantomimes that we think of. They had dialogue, but they just did a lot of kind of acting, and eventually it became more just acting things out. It was so bad that, some of the worst emperors ever, like Caligula and Nero, they thought it was a blast that would fit them. They would torch people for fun. Nero has poisoned his father and had his, mother. I mean, they would make funny plays out of it. Like that was the thing to do. It was so bad that when you had a Christian come to the throne, Constantinople, all the Christians denounced theater as immoral and obscene. So it went from being something very valuable to society and thoughtful to being just associated with the very worst aspects of humanity, unfortunately. So it never reached the level of sophistication, that's to say the least. But they were comedies mostly, and they would base them loosely on Greek comedies, and they liked comedies instead of tragedies. And some people compare modern America to, a little bit of this type of Roman kind of favor of entertainment, which is kind of a sad comparison. Seneca was this is probably the last guy we're going to mention here, because there's Plautus, and slapstick is still got, we still use it today, but became the basis for some playwrights like Shakespeare and others. So some of the stuff they developed did stay. Okay, here are the main ones. The first playwright is Andronicus. Then you have Terence, a playwright from Africa. So he was well appreciated. Took popular stories, turned into plays. You see how the numbers are getting lower? And then you get Seneca, was the one I read from a while ago. And he's considered their greatest tragic playwright, although he was basically known as a Stoic, which takes a kind of disinterested, detached view of life instead of the hedonist sort of indulge at everything. He's in that time right before the Roman Empire kind of fell, and the Christians took control of it briefly. So he has a different perspective, and it's much more critical. All right, yeah. So it said he had taught the future Emperor Nero, and Nero, the only positive thing you can say about him is that he was a supporter of the arts and theater, but I don't know that I would want him as a sponsor. All right, so after the time of Nero and Seneca, the Western Roman Empire fell. Of course, we look back because we've only been a nation for 250 years, but theater went away. because the Romans just destroyed it basically, and the Christians threw it out, and you don't really have any more theater of note until you get past the Middle Ages, when the Roman Catholic Church was the dominant institution, and very little theater going on. And then you get the Renaissance, and that's the revival of what was good from the Greek culture, and then that eventually became the revival of theater. And we'll study that a little in another chapter.